What is going on, Governor? It's Chisgule here, and today we're going to cover the top 3 epics and top 3 legendaries that you should just leave at 4 stars. If you like Rise of Kingdoms videos where we help you be efficient with your star count, you should like and subscribe because we're pretty passionate about being efficient with our spending in Rise of Kingdoms, and we are a sponsored creator. We're going to start with the epics, then we're going to go to the legendary commanders, the ones that I think you really, honestly, just leave them at 4 stars and call it a day. And I want to start with an honorable mention. I want to start with an honorable mention at the epic tier, and that is actually Boadicea. I don't love Boadicea as a primary commander in the late game because there's not a ton of stuff that you can put onto her with the exception of doing PvE, battling barbarians. So of course, for battling barbarians, she's actually really good to continue to level up and to continue to use in that way. I personally am using her for battling barbarians. I've got her to level 60. So she's an honorable mention because actually there's a use in PvE, battling barbarians, but in PvP where you're battling players, the skill tree is great, but the integration tree just doesn't offer very much. And the move speed that you can get from peacekeeping is cool, but I think we can find a better commander to pair her with and use her as a secondary. So she's an honorable mention because I think she's still a fine commander to bring up to level 60. Again, I use her at level 60 for battling barbarians. The number 3 commander that you could just leave at 4 stars and call it a day at the epic tier is actually a very powerful commander. It is a very powerful commander, and that is Osman. Now, the reason that I think you could use Osman as a secondary commander, and in most cases feel really good about that, is that he is a leadership and skill tree commander. He wants to be paired with a commander that's generating a ton of rage. A ton of rage. And he can do that with the skill tree. However, he doesn't really cater to any specific type of troop. So if you leave him at 4 stars and you use him as a secondary, you could pair with a Herman primary and benefit from the extra rage gen from National Hero and bring only archers and get the benefit of having a full archer march. And I think that's pretty cool. In a similar vein, you could put him as a secondary to Pelagius, and that way you get the benefit of full cavalry talents as well as the skill tree, which I think is really, really powerful. So Osman is a fine commander to have taken to 6 stars, but if you're prioritizing things in the early game, I would consider leaving him at 4 stars because he's very flexible and will slot in just fine with other commanders. The second commander at the epic tier that I would just leave at 4 stars is actually Mundaka. We've started to star him up because we just have enough experience from battling Shrine and Altar Guardians to level him up and enough stars that we can basically infinitely star up our epic commanders. Like we've got like 3,000 epic stars at this point. It's totally nuts. The thing about Mundaka that I don't like him as a primary for is the fact that he really wants you to have a lot of rage generation to take advantage of the first skill, which reduces the defense of the target. The more frequently you can have that skill active, the more effective you're going to be. And he doesn't generate a lot of rage with his talents. In fact, the attack tree is more focused on, well, elevating your attack over time in the form of effortless. And also you get some attack from Lord of War. So I think that he's a great commander, but I would use him as a secondary with some other commander, optimally with rage generation, maybe Sun Tzu, as your primary. The number 1 commander at the epic tier that I would leave at 4 stars because you know what? They don't actually need to be the primary commander for much of the time that you're playing the game is actually CPO. CPO is a commander that's honestly probably most optimally paired with a commander like Joan of Arc. You'd want to use Joan of Arc as the primary for the rage generation that she's going to offer, and CPO as a secondary in that configuration in order to offer a ton of buffs to your allies while also being fairly tanky yourself in the form of this first skill. So I think you could leave CPO at 4 stars, use him as a secondary to a commander like Joan of Arc, and honestly, like, I find the number of uses for CPO kind of rapidly diminishing over time, And he's a solid commander in the early game, maybe even into the mid game. But by the time you get into the late game, you're going to have a lot of other options as a primary commander. You're going to be sticking with troops that care about only one type of unit. So I would use him 4 stars as a secondary to Joan of Arc if you're going to buff and want to hang in the open field for a while and then just call it a day. In a similar vein, though, you probably could use Boadicea and might be better off. You generate more rage that way. You got a lot of options as a secondary to your Joan of Arc. Even Osman is a great secondary for Joan of Arc. So for epics, those are my 3 that I would leave at 4 stars. Osman, Ulji Mundaka, and CPO. Let's talk about the legendaries. And at the legendary tier, we actually have a lot of runners up for getting into this list, the top 3. We have some honorable mentions here. The first honorable mention is Hannibal Barca. There's Hannibal Barca. Here's the thing about Hannibal Barca. He's great in the early game. He's fine in the mid game. But by the time you get to the late game, you got a lot of better options. And I find that I really don't use him all that much, especially as a primary commander. So I would be inclined to say that Hannibal Barca as a commander, you can save your stars and just leave them at 4 stars, unless you're really going ham in the early game, in which case take him to 6 stars, enjoy the advantage of being super high powered and going totally nuts. However, now that we've got a commander such as Ethelfled, I would make the argument even still in the early game, you're better off with an Ethelfled primary and a Hannibal Barca secondary. Leave your Hannibal Barca at 4 stars. The next set of commanders that I'm going to give an honorable mention to, because they're gatherers, and we're not really putting stars into gatherers, but that would be Sundok and also Cleopatra. These are commanders that you can leave at 4 stars. You get the maximum value, all their skills are unlocked, and call it a day. Don't put more stars into gathering commanders, in my opinion, at the legendary tier. The other tiers, you can have plenty of blue stars and green stars and epic stars eventually. Don't worry about leveling up those gatherers. It's just legendary gatherers. Don't put stars into that. Okay, the last honorable mention, and this is an honorable mention, okay, is Mehmed II. And the reason I say that is that you don't really need Mehmed II to be the primary. The thing that he is the best at is hitting cities. That's his specialty. And if you're hitting a city, you probably are using a commander like Saladin as the primary for launching that sort of an operation. That would be way more optimal. You're probably using a commander that cares about a specific troop type. So if you leave your Mehmed II at 4 stars, you could always slot him in as the secondary to any one of those commanders that might be the flavor of the week for attacking cities, and you don't have to have leveled him up, which is pretty cool. I think that is a fine approach to take, and is the route that I personally would go, assuming that I even expertise him at all, or I'm hitting cities, which, I don't know, doesn't seem like a thing I'm going to do. A part of the reason he's just an honorable mention is that you could use him as a primary in the open field, and he's not bad. He's got AoE, which is actually very, very strong for the open field. He also lets you elevate your troop count, even in the open field, which is very, very strong. So he can be a fine commander for the open field, and that is why he's just an honorable mention. You could still feel pretty good about starring him up, but I'm going to save my stars there, and if you're low on stars, you could consider doing the same. The next 3 are the commanders that we think at the legendary tier you probably shouldn't star up. And the first one is Charlemagne. Charlemagne, unlike Mehmed II, is really only good for hitting cities. That's the one thing he does. He does it well, but he's all about hitting cities. That's in part because the expertise skill is only relevant for, well, hitting a city. So my guidance here is that, again, you could use him at 4 stars, slot him in with whatever other commander is really good in either hitting a city and also doing something else that you would have other reasons to have at a high star level, and just slot in Charlemagne as a secondary. If you were hitting cities with both an expertise Charlemagne and Mehmed II, I mean, kudos to you, then I would star up Mehmed II, not Charlemagne. The number 2 commander to leave at 4 stars as a legendary is El Cid. And the reason is that he's got the versatility tree, and that versatility tree really doesn't offer much value at all. If we get a look at the talents here, and again, this is just my opinion, like, we care about fighting, not gathering. Like, we don't care about that. We don't care about watchtower damage. Like, we're not hitting a city with this commander, not as the primary. And we don't care about the watchtower for rallying anyways. There's a bunch of stuff going on here that it just is so mix and match. It's not actually particularly valuable. We do like the skill tree. We do like the archery tree. Pick literally any other archer commander. Use them as the primary instead. Keep El Cid at 4 stars. Okay, the number 1 legendary to leave at 4 stars. That's what we're going to cover now. That number 1 legendary to leave at 4 stars is Tamaris. In my opinion, she truly is designed to be the secondary commander to Edward. And there's no reason to star her up any further because you're going to use Edward primary and her as the secondary. That's because you want to stack up a lot of poison to do a high amount of skill damage. To accomplish that, you use Edward as the primary. And the value of doing that is that Edward takes more rage to get his active skill to fire. And so this configuration, we believe, is the correct way to get max damage from Edward and Tamaris. I suppose it bears that there's testing to be done. It could be that if you use Tamaris as the primary and like go with the attack tree and fight to the death, like maybe that's better, but it just feels really unlikely to me that that would be the optimal configuration. That feels really unlikely to me. So my recommendation is going to be to use Edward primary, Tamaris secondary. If I use Tamaris at all, she's going to be as the secondary to Edward. So that's the game plan. Hopefully, my friends, you enjoyed this video about which commanders to leave at 4 stars. You only want to star up a commander if you think they need to be used as the primary commander. And the ones that we shared with you, we see minimal value to there being a primary, or we find that there are a bunch of situations where they could just be the secondary commander, so you could just save your stars. If this video was helpful, you should like and subscribe because we got more optimizations to come. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.